All right. So let's do these questions and answers. So I just put them in kind of the reverse order that I received them, but also I kind of also sometimes they're about the similar topic, so I sort of organize them in that way too. The first question here is, and also, I kind of like edited because I can't help but edit. That's just my nature. So I sometimes edited the questions down. It might not be exactly the way you asked it. Almost everyone has a need to create. Is this reflective of divinity? That's the first question. So the answer is yes, and here's why. So what's divinity? Divinity is consciousness, which is called Brahman. What's consciousness? Consciousness is the basis for experience. Consciousness, the thing that experiences, right? So if divinity is consciousness, then it's going to, you could say, want to be what it is. Everything that exists has a want to be what it is. And since, one more to admit, and since Brahman is consciousness, it wants to be conscious. So it has inherent predilection to experience things. So what does this have to do with creativity? Well, that's why consciousness has to manifest things. Why is consciousness expressed as both subject and object? Why isn't it just the subject? When you think of consciousness, you don't think of colors and shapes. You think of beings, people, sentient things. You don't think of insentient things. But consciousness is actually both the sentient thing and the insentient thing. And why is that? It's because it's creative. Why is it creative? Because it wants to experience. What is it going to experience? It wants to produce something to experience. So that's why the drive for creativity is essential and inherent in what it means to exist. So it's inherent in God, it's inherent in divinity. And that's the meaning of the Upanishadic statement, Eko Bahu Syat. One thing must be many things, wants to be many things. So Kamyata, Bahusyam Prajayata. It's because of its inherent predilection or its inherent karma or want that it becomes many things. So yes, creativity is inherent in consciousness or divinity. But the follow-up question here is, if Brahman has an inherent creative predilection, then doesn't that defy its definition? Specifically, the definition is it's without anything specific. It doesn't have any specificity to it. Consciousness doesn't have specificity. That as a subject, consciousness doesn't have specificity. It's in the object that there's specificity. So if Brahman doesn't have specific things about it, then how can it have a specific impulse or a specific predilection or a desire? So the question really wasn't, is creativity inherent in Brahman, but it was is it inherent in divinity? And so Brahman is not the entirety of divinity. The entire concept of divinity isn't exhaustively described by the concept of Brahman. It's a triplicate of things. Jnanam, it's one thing, Jnanam Advayam, which has a triplicate way of being experienced. Brahmeti, Paramatmeti, Bhagavaniti. So it's the three of them together which are divinity, and the creativity in each is different. In Brahman or consciousness, creativity is there, but it's not as anything definite. It's everything in Brahman is not definite. It's just as latent potentiality. Just like consciousness is the basis for reality, but there's nothing specific about reality in consciousness. It's what consciousness produces which becomes the specifics of reality. So creativity in Brahman is just a amorphous, latent, the word latent or the word potential capability. potential as opposed to kinetic. But in Paramatma or in Atma, it becomes kinetic. The creativity is kinetic. So things, actual things, identifiable things, Atma, are produced by a Paramatma. So creativity, the potential of creativity is in the fact that everything is conscious. But the actualization of creativity is in the distinction, the creation of distinction, the creation of a line, the creation of a curve, the creation of a pitch or a tone that generates an Atma or something specific. So that's in Paramatma. In Paramatma, the latent creativity of Brahman becomes actual. And in Bhagavan, the purpose of the creativity is realized. The joy of the creativity, the pleasure of experiencing the created thing. So the full thing that we know as creativity has to include all three of the divine facets. When it's just in Brahman, it wouldn't be noticeable as anything specific. It wouldn't do anything specific. So it doesn't violate the definition of Brahman as something non-specific. When it's actually activating something specific and making something, it's not Brahman, it's Atma, Paramatma. And when it's enjoying that, it's Bhagavan. Okay. I thought that was very interesting question, which led to some nice distinctions between these three aspects of divinity. Now let's go on and let's talk more about Brahman. Jiva Goswami reasons that Brahman realization is beyond an individual's experiential capacity. Brahman is not something that can fit within our intellectual brackets. So, but it is capable but the individual is capable of experiencing Brahman. So how is it possible? So it must be possible as an extension. This is what we call in English revelation, where the object being experienced is revealing itself rather than the perceiver discovering the object. There's two types of experience. One is where the perceiver discovers and perceives the object, discovers. But the other is where the object reveals itself to the perceiver. In the first type, where the perceiver discovers the object, it's dependent upon the expertise and capabilities of the perceiver. But in the second case, where it's the object revealing itself, it's dependent mostly upon the revelationary capacity of the object. How well can the object reveal itself? So it's not important anymore that the individual doesn't have infinite capacity. It's that Brahman has infinite capacity. That's why the individual can experience Brahman, because Brahman has the capacity to reveal itself. So Jiva Goswami's reasoning is that this shows that the experience of Brahman requires a revelation from Brahman, which implies some sort of bhakti or mercy or compassion on behalf of Brahman. It wants to be known and it extends itself. So what he's saying is even Brahman realization requires bhakti yoga. The way of evoking mercy or compassion from a thing is bhakti. It's an emotional response to an emotional expression. So the question here is, since Jiva Goswami's reasoning is that even Brahman realization realizes bhakti yoga, even Brahman realization requires bhakti yoga, the question is, what about people that don't do bhakti yoga, but they realize Brahman? What about the jnana yogis? So it's jnana yoga. The point that Jiva Goswami is making is that jnana yoga itself includes practices of bhakti. That's his point, is that actually the actual active ingredient, like when you buy medicine or something and there's an active ingredient and then there's like the other carrier ingredients. The actual active ingredient in any yogic path is the bhakti, according to Jiva Goswami. The other carriers are there to deliver the medicine to different types of people who can tolerate different kinds of flavors. So Jnana Yoga, for example, it involves mantra. It will involve meditation on mantra. And those mantras will have some mention of deities, praise, or petitions of deities. So that's an example of Bhakti Yoga. For example, even the word Om, it's conceived of as a praise of or an invocation of, a naming of Brahman. So Jiva Goswami is not saying that everybody has to practice Bhakti Yoga. What he's saying is that whatever everybody's practicing, there's some element of bhakti in it, which is the agent that's actually responsible for the success in that endeavor. So far, so good. Now let's see what the next one is. Okay, here's another interesting. All the questions were really interesting. Since Brahman doesn't have specific qualities, it's described more readily as a negation of negative material qualities. This is one of the points that Jiva Goswami makes, and this is one of the points that everybody makes, every Vedantist makes. Since Brahman doesn't have specific qualities, you can't really say it's red, it's blue, but you could say it's not red, it's not blue, it's not this, it's not that. So particularly what you would say is you would negate negative qualities to get an accurate description of Brahman. So it's not limited. But the question goes on, this makes it seem like the Brahman experience or Brahman itself is lonely or void-like or seems negatively oriented. So my reply to this is, think about this carefully. If you remove all negatives, because that's the most effective way, according to the sages, of describing Brahman is by negating negatives. So if you negate negatives, do you wind up with a negative? You don't. The negation of negatives doesn't give you a negative sum. Like if you have debts and you negate your debts, do you wind up in debt? You wind up out of debt. So the conclusion that since Brahman is the negation of negative energies, it seems like a negative thing doesn't have logic, doesn't have internal logic. If you remove all negatives, you wind up with something that doesn't have negative traits, and which is therefore the basis for positive conditions. Like if you get rid of all your debts, it doesn't necessarily mean you have a ton of money, but it's possible now to have money if you don't have debt. And that's what Brahman is. So for example, loneliness and non-existence or void, those are negative things. So therefore they can't be accurate descriptions of Brahman and what it is like to experience Brahman. And one way to make this less theoretical and more real is to think about your sleep, because deep sleep is the closest common experience that we have to Brahman experience. So when I'm asleep, deeply asleep, am I lonely? Ask yourself that question. When I ask myself that question, I don't really feel lonely. When I think about my deep sleep, it doesn't feel like a lonely experience. So I'm not dreaming about anything. I'm not relating to anything. I'm not involved in any actual activity, no dreams, nothing, but it definitely doesn't feel lonely. In fact, it feels kind of nice. That will give you an idea of what Brahman experience is like. Now, a follow-up to this is another question of, what about love? Is love a part of experiencing Brahman? And is there any sense of bhakti in Brahman? The answer to this is very similar to the answer of how creativity exists in Brahman. So remember, what is Brahman? Brahman is consciousness. What is consciousness? Consciousness is the basis or the potential of experiences. And what is love? Love is a certain type of experience. It's a certain way of feeling towards things, and therefore it's a certain way of experiencing things. So if love is an experience and consciousness is the potential for experience and Brahman is consciousness, then love is potential in Brahman. But just review like the fourth grade physics, like the very early physics that you ever learned in any schools. Just understand the difference between potential and kinetic. When you pick up an apple and hold it up a little bit above the ground, you are bringing potential energy into that apple to fall, but the apple is not falling. But without having the potential energy, it can't fall. So in Brahman, there's all the potential energy, but none of it is kinetic or actuated. It's the same thing with love. Love, to describe the experience of love in Brahman, it would be experienced as a latent potential or a latent potentiality. It's not an absence of love in Brahman, but nor is it an active or specific love. It's a latent, inherent basis of love. So that's kind of the first batch of questions. So far, so good. I mean, for me at least, I'm having a good time. Another question was about a particular phrase, Triputi. And how is the phrase Triputi resolved in the context of Bhakti Yoga? So Triputi means three putis. It just means three things acting together. Three interrelated things is what the term Triputi literally means, like a triplicity. Basically, the root meaning or the root application of Triputi is in the grammatical concept of a noun, a verb, and the object of the verb. That's the basic Triputi. Everything else is some variant of that. So in other words, depending on what the noun is, the Triputi will have a different context, depending on what the verb is. So for example, if you're thinking about art, it's like if art is the verb, the expression of beauty, then the Triputi would be the artist, the art, the artistic expression, and the audience or the person or the being with whom the art is shared. Verbs can sometimes be Atma, like self-objective. So sometimes the object can be the artist itself. The one being can be on both sides of the Triputi in some cases. But in the typical or the most fully manifested sense of Triputi, there's a subject creating some action, and then there's some object receiving the action. So what is it in Bhakti? Well, it would be Bhakta, Bhakti, and Bhaktya, I think. So it would be the lover, the love, and the beloved. That's Triputi and Bhakti. Because Bhakti means love. So it would be lover, love itself, the expression of the love, and the receiver of the love. In Dhyana, let's just compare it with some other ones. It's actually very easy to understand in Bhakti. It's more difficult to understand some of the other ones. In Dhyana or meditation, it's the contemplator, the contemplation, and the contemplated. So contemplator, contemplation, contemplated is the same thing as lover, love, beloved. It's just with a different verb. It's just a different expression of the same relationship between things. That's important. It's not like Triputi means something different in Jnana Yoga and Bhakti Yoga. It means the same thing, but it's just in this context. Advaita Jnana, one thing manifests itself in different ways in different contexts. So in Jnana Yoga, it would be the Gyan, which would be the thing in the middle, the knowledge, and then on one side would be the knower, and on the other side would be the known. Then Bhakti, it's Bhakti in the middle, and one side is the Bhakta, and the other it's the receiver of the Bhakti. In karma, this is kind of the most difficult one to understand. It's the actor, the action, and the thing which is acted on. But the thing which is acted on is also like the intent of the action, the purpose of the action. So it's also the effect of the action. So that is Triputi. Everything you wanted to know about Triputi, but we're afraid to ask. Okay, moving on. Here's a practical question about Bhakti sadhana. Should we include all the Bhakti practices in our sadhana, even if we don't do them perfectly? Or should we include only those that we resonate with? So the best place to go for an answer to this question would be the Bhakti Padati, the practitioner's guide to Bhakti, which is Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the first division of that. So in that book, after that book written by Sri Rupa, after he explains all the Bhakti practices, he makes the following statement. Sabhaktir, Sabhaktir, Ekamukya Anga Ashrita Anaikangi Katava. Sabhaktir Ekmuk Anga Ashrita Anaikangi Katava Svasana Anusarena Nishtata Siddhikrit Bhavet. So it means she can avail herself of, she kind of means the bhakti itself, or it could mean the practitioner. She can avail herself of one primary bhakti practice, ek mukhyanga, or of many, anekangika atava. So bhakti sadhana can either be ekanga or anekanga, singular or manifold. And how would it be determined? She should obtain perfection, siddhikrit bhavet, by focusing on those that seem most essential, anusarena, to her own personal inclinations, swavasana, to your own mind, to your own prakriti, to your own composition, to your own samskars. So that's the answer. The answer is you should not try to do all the bhakti practices. You should try to do those that seem most essential to you as an individual. But the one thing to mention here is in this Paditi, he mentions 64 practices. So he defines 64 practices. But he categorizes them into two groups. One is the actual practices, and the other is the preliminary steps. So here he used this word mukhya anga, which means the actual practices. So of the actual practices, this is all, you don't have to do any particular number of them. You can even just do one of them. But of the preliminary practices, there's not the same freedom to ignore them. The reason is that the preliminary practices are things like finding a guide, learning from the guide, asking questions of the guide, applying the instructions of the guide. So being kind to people, et cetera, not causing harm to people. Those are the initial 20 prerequisites. So those we should apply ourselves as fully as possible to all 20. But of the actual practices, there's no need to do more than one. Okay? Now we're going to go more into like practical good stuff. Next question here is, when I try to visualize the beautiful forms of Vishnu in my meditation practice, my imagination takes over and distracts me. So also, like, I could put myself into your shoes and kind of feel like, why did he say it that way? That's not the way I meant it. But it's interesting. This is the way I heard it. So it's also kind of interesting. It might reveal something that you didn't realize about your own question, the way you were asking it. So when I try to visualize the beautiful forms of Vishnu in my meditation practice, my imagination takes over and distracts me. Visualization is visual and image. Visualization and imagination. Visualization is not possible without imagination. So it couldn't have been an accurately phrased question, which isn't just important for, OCD Virgo semanticism. It's important because if you don't really understand your own question, then you don't really understand yourself. And then you'll apply your efforts to the wrong thing. So it's not really that imagination is distracting your visualization. It's because the imagination is the visualization. So it must be more accurate to say that the imagination is distracted. So in other words, what actually must probably be happening in a meditation is that the imagination starts imagining things, other things, than the object of contemplation. Because of some similarity in the thing that's being contemplated to some other thing, that the imagination starts drifting to the other thing. So if you're imagining something red, and then you remember a car that drove by the next day with that same color, and then your imagination starts moving off of the topic of the thing that it wanted to visualize. So it's not that imagination is a problem. It's that the imagination is having problems. This is really important because in any struggle, you want to know the enemy clearly because you want to make sure you don't attack your friends. You want to make sure you attack your enemies. So similarly, you don't want to direct energy against your imagination. You want to direct your energy against your distraction. Following this up, though, is the person asks, maybe I shouldn't pursue visualization, therefore maybe it would be better to pursue sonic meditation. So would it be better maybe to say his name and remain silent, just listening to the sound, keeping space for something real to come? So something real to come reminded me of Amazon, because these days I only basically shop on Amazon and everything comes to the door. So a lot of times I'm waiting for something real to arrive, something real to come. There's my imagination moving off in a distraction, but it's not really a distraction because this is a very good analogy. When something real comes, it comes to me through my front door. It doesn't come flying through the wall. There's a way into my house, and packages are going to come in through that way. Similarly, there's a way into the mind, and packages are not going to come in some other way, even if it's a graceful dispensation or revelation. It's going to come through the doorway into the mind, which is the imagination. So even if you move your focus off of visual imagination and move it to sonic meditation, you're still going to be involved in imagination, but it's sonic imagination. What is sonic imagination? It's where you resolve a sound of a word into a meaning. And you get the image of a meaning in your mind as a result of a sound. So even if you move away from rupa dhyana to nama dhyana, away from meditation on a form and to the meditation on a name, you'll still have to deal with your imagination. So you can't, if you're going to do any work with your mind, which is what meditation is, you won't be able to avoid imagination, and that's not a problem. Imagination is the friend. So my advice is, don't be so hard on your friend. Don't be hard on your imagination. It's your best friend. It's your imagination is actually the meditation engine. It's the thing that gives you the content of the meditation. It's also a pain in the neck because it gives you other content. But if you kill that thing, you have nothing to meditate on. So it's just like the way people take care of trees. They want to make a tree a certain shape, that's fine. But if they overcut the tree, they could kill the tree. This is the same thing with imagination. If you over police it, it's not going to be as productive as you think. First of all, over policing it will be very exhausting and frustrating. So what's going to happen is you're going to tire of the sadhana. And it's really important not to tire of the sadhana, because the sadhana, what it requires most is nishtata, which is constancy. So when people who are overly negative towards themselves, really, in the practice, they wind up getting tired of it, not able to try again. So this will happen in every practitioner. There's a refractory period. There's a period where you can't do anything anymore, where you're tired and you need to rest. So, but for like very, very kind of advanced within the novice context practitioners, that period is very short. Maybe it's only a few moments. They reset and then they restore the meditation. But if you over police your meditation and you over police your imagination, that period where you need a break is going to become long. It can become potentially months, years, and lifetimes if you're overly negative towards your progress. And another thing will happen is, if you misidentify imagination as the enemy, you can develop a phobia of visualization and specificity. So if you develop a phobia, that phobia, you'll have a fear of entering the 6th stage of meditation, which is dhyana, and you'll get stuck in the 5th, which is pratyahara, and you'll think that the 5th is the goal. Pratyahara is just the voidness of the mind, the emptiness of the mind. So you'll get stuck in voidism. So my advice is, let your imagination do its thing, just like a kid. What you do with a kid is you make sure that you give the kid healthy input. Don't control the output so much, control the input. So with the mind and meditation, it means make sure that you're giving it mantra and you're giving it shastra. Good input of clear ideas. Then let it work. Let it do its thing. If you don't let it play and go around, sometimes it's going to develop a dislike towards you. When you notice that your imagination has wandered off into space, don't feel negative about that. When you've actually accomplished something. You've accomplished what a yogi strives to do, which is to notice that the mind has gone off on its own. It's doing its own vrittis. It's doing its own thing. So it's actually a success when you notice that your contemplation has wandered off. So feel good about that. But noticing that you're drifting off in your imagination is the first step to having your imagination stay where you want it. What the goal is to notice it sooner and sooner and sooner and be more sensitive to it. And so if you're getting that, if you feel like over some time you're starting to notice the drifting of the imagination into la la land more quickly, then that's your progress. That's the progress. In the Gita, in the 6th chapter where Krishna is explaining how meditation and contemplation works, he said, yato nishchalati manas chanchalamasthiram tatas tato niyam yaitad atman yeva vasham nayet. Which means this is just what happens. This is what meditation is. It's the drifting of the mind. Yato nishchalati manas chanchalamasthiram, because that's what the mind does. And it's the effort to notice the drifting and then bring it back. So for practical advice, when you notice that your concentration has strayed, your imagination has drifted, the thing you need to do at that moment is ask yourself, do I have any more gas in my tank? Does my car have any more gas, or do I just need to stop for the day? Because don't over push. So if your answer to your question is, yeah, I still have energy to work on this, then proceed to the next step. Otherwise, just get up and go have a banana or something. Your meditation session has ended. You'll go back to it later when you feel refreshed. But if you already feel refreshed, then what you just do is you grab your mind by the horns and you pull it back in and you put a leash on it. And you try to tell it, stay right here. And the practical ways of doing that, the practical ways to achieve pratyahara which is the telling of the mind, just empty yourself and stay right here, is to utilize asana and pranayama. So correct your seating, focus on the correctness of your seating, and breathe. Focus on the quality of the breath. By that time, your mind should already almost be clear, and then you should be able to restart. That's what meditation is. Meditation is not a constant state of focus on a thing. Meditation is the effort to make it constant. All right. So that's that whole strand of questions. I thank you for those questions. Those were really good. I see I got a chat message. Those distractions are samskars, aren't they? The distractions, yeah, the other distractions will go to the impressions that you have in your mind, like the example of the car. All right, more questions, many more questions. A whole new type of question. Is the Jiva a subtype of Atma? And my reply or the answer here is not exactly. They're two words that refer to similar things in slightly different ways. So what does Jiva mean? And what does Atma mean? Jiva means a living thing. For example, one of the most common blessings is Chiranjeevi. You hear that word Jiva and Chiranjeevi, right? Even in my wife's language, the blessing is Jivili. So Jiva means live long. Chiranjeevi means live long. Jivali means to life. Jiva means something that is alive. So it doesn't have to specifically refer to anything else except that. It just means something that's alive. So typically the way the word is used is a living thing, which means all the components of the living thing, the body, the mind, the senses, the soul, the ego, the entire, everything just in one blur as a living thing. That's a jiva. Then what's Atma? Atma can also be applied in different ways, but what the root meaning of Atma means is something specific, something identifiable. The most common way of using that meaning is to refer to a soul, a conscious being. So why is that? What is Atma? Atma is identical with Brahman, except, remember the concept of potential Connecticut? I almost said Connecticut. Potential Connecticut. The concept of potential and kinetic, that will help you understand the difference between Brahman and Atma. Brahman is consciousness. Atma is kinetic consciousness. In other words, when the consciousness is actually in the act of perceiving specific perceptions. And what happens as a result of perceiving a specific perception is it develops an identity in relationship to the thing that's perceived. That's what is identity. What is ego or identity? It's relationship between one thing and another that gives things identity. So Atma is a specific identifiable thing because it is a conscious, active conscious principle. So Atma's activated consciousness, right? The word Jiva is typically used in the context of a body, mind, soul complex for a distorted conditional self. So don't forget, words have their denotations and the connotations. So I've explained to you what the denotation of Jiva and Atma is. Now the connotation, the way that it's most commonly used, the way that the word Jiva is most commonly used is for an animal, for a human being, for a single-celled amoeba, for something that's alive. Whereas the way that Atma is most commonly used is for some specific aspect of a self, something that identifies someone uniquely as a self, most commonly for the actual conscious being itself. So it's not like a jiva is a subtype of Atma or an Atma is a subtype of jiva. It's just that they're two words for referring to living things with different connotative meanings. And there's also the compound Jivatma. which really there's the compound word Jivatma, which means the Atma as a living being. Now, a follow-up question. Follow-up question is, we've always been Jivas, but we can become pure Atmas, right? Boop, boop. Wrong. It's not that we've always been Jivas and we can become Atmas. We've always been Jiva and Atma. Like sometimes maybe we're not Jiva when we're sleeping spiritually, when the Atma is inactive. But basically, it's cyclically speaking, we've always been a Jiva and we've always been an Atma, and we'll always be a Jiva and we'll always be an Atma. But maybe you have this adjective on Atma of pure Atma. So that's an important adjective. Atma can either be pure or impure. Atma can have a clear perception. What is Atma? It's a perceiving thing. It's consciousness in the act of perception. So it can either have a clear or an unclear perception. So therefore it can have a clear or a distorted concept of identity. So probably this term, pure Atma, probably means an Atma without a distorted perception, or an Atma with a clear identity or an accurate identity. And so the question is, can the Atma that doesn't have an accurate identity become an Atma that does? And the answer is yes. If the question is how, the answer is yogas. And there's different paths of yogas. Why do we say that the Atma is untouched, even though the ego, mind, and intellect are going through suffering? Suffering and happiness come and here's my reply. The suffering and the happiness are part of what the Atma experiences, not a part of the Atma itself. The Atma itself is the experiencer, and it experiences things. So suffering and happiness are states of mind. And the states of mind are influences by states of the world. So the way that the world changes its conditions causes different states to appear in the mind, and the condition of the mind is what the consciousness is observing, experiencing. So the experiencer is not the experience or the experienced. It's the Triputi, right? The experiencer is a distinct part of the Triputi. There's no meaning to any part of the Triputi unless they're all taken together, but yet they are distinct parts. So the things which happen in the experienced field don't happen in the experiencer, but they are experienced by the experiencer. So there's never any injury to the Atma as a result of any experience, but there's injury to the Atma's instruments, the mind, the senses, the brain, the body, all the time. Conversely, there's never any increase or fortune for the Atma, but there's increase in fortune possible for the instruments of the Atma. And that is meaningful because the Atma experiences those things. So it's not that suffering is not meaningful or joy is not meaningful. It's just that it doesn't actually happen in the self. It happens in what the self observes. We could probably have a follow-up session for follow-up questions on all these questions. Do we have an Atma even if our Atma is blind? This is a big, the wording here also is revealing a big misconception, a basic fundamental misconception. If you ever find yourself using this wording, stop yourself and think about it. Do we have an Atma? Who is we? Atma is the we. Atma is the I. Aham Artha Atma. The Atma is the thing that is denoted by the word I. Without any other prefixes, without any other suffixes, just the word I is the Atma. So you get into this weird Western thing of like, I have a soul. Does this thing have a soul? Nobody has a soul. The soul is what has other things. The soul possesses things. That's why it's called a soul. So no, you don't have an Atma. You are an Atma. And what if this Atma is blind? The Atma can't be blind, because what is an Atma? It's consciousness. But maybe instead of blind, you meant really bad vision. Vision can be distorted. So you are always an Atma, and can your Atma be blind? No, but your perceptions can be distorted or sleeping. So distorted that it's like asleep. So that's another kind of batch of questions. When we go into the next batch, depending on how much ADHD, or what would be the opposite? Attention deficit, AS something, attention surplus you have, you'll still be keeping up. But the practice of the meditation of yoga will directly combat the AD, the attention deficit. So moving on to the next thing, where did nightmares come from? So this is a new chapter in the questions, a little short chapter about dreams. Where did nightmares come from? Are they past life memories, other people's ill will, repressed anger, fears, and hatred? Are they simply bad omens or bad karma paying back in another level? My reply, multiple choice answer D, all of the above. That's what nightmares are. They can come from any of those things. Another question about dreaming is, what is prophetic dreaming? Is it that some of us are more attuned to the subtleties? Prophetic dreaming, of course, is where you foresee some future event in the dream. So there's different ways that prophetic dreaming can be explained or understood. In some cases, what's going on is the subconsciousness is computing all the time. You don't pay attention to it, because if we paid attention to it, we wouldn't be able to pay attention to anything else. But the brain has an ability to perform computations in a section of the mind that doesn't get directly observed by the observer. So that's called subconscious. And it's running computations there all the time. And it's running computations that are favorable to its ambitions, the things that it wants to know about, the things that it wants to learn about, the things that it wants to do. So often the results of those contemplations come when you don't have anything else to pay attention to. In other words, when you're asleep. That's why you dream. You understand how this is working, with how subconsciousness and dreaming is working? When we have open eyes, then the consciousness is focusing mainly on the input, but there's still computations going on in the sub layers. When the eyes close and there's nothing else to take the conscious attention, then it can notice the things that are happening underneath. And that's what dreams are. So in some cases, you'll get the computations or the predictions. What computations are predictions? I think I should do this to get that. So doing this will probably lead to that outcome. That's what the intellect is doing under the surface all the time. So some cases it's going to hit a jackpot. It's going to come up with a scenario that will actually be the one that you'll follow and that will work out or not work out, lead to a certain circumstance that actually happens. So in some cases, you'll get a dream of some kind of combination of probabilities that actually happened. Then you can say that the deities that are involved in the mental functions. So sometimes you might want to say, no, it's from an angel. I got this prophetic thing from an angel, or I got this from a god. Krishna gave me this vision. That's also fine, because your mind operates under the jurisdiction of devatas. So the subconscious computations, it's fine to insert the concept that the correctness of this prophetic computation was a gift or guided by some devata. That's also viable. So that would be like what you're saying, more attuned to the subtleties. It's the people are picking up on the subtleties in the subconscious mind and calculating them more effectively. Another option with prophetic dreaming is an interesting thing about future. So future is not a straight line from the present, but future is a curve which loops back to the past, so that things echo and repeat themselves. So some of what we see as prophecy is not really foreseeing, but it's rear seeing. It's hindsight. Some of what we feel is a prophetic dream was actually a memory of something. So for example, you may suddenly find yourself on a street, and that you may have then suddenly remember that 2 years ago you dreamt that you would be walking on that street right up to this particular place. And that's because you've been on streets just like that many, many times in the past, because of your prakriti and your nature and how you get attracted to certain things and go in certain places. So those are some explanations of prophetic dreams, or dreams in general. Now we're going to open a new chapter of questions, which also has to do with bedroomy type of things. It has to do with sex. When you discussed the Vedic standards of love and sex, you explained that in the first yuga, love was basically free and open. And moving into the next yugas, they had to implement more and more rules leading towards monogamy, mainly to protect women and children. This explanation made me feel a little weird because I feel like my natural inclination is towards monogamy. Well, that shouldn't make you feel weird because you live in Kali Yuga. If your inclination was towards monogamy and you were a resident of Satya Yuga, that would be unusual. But if you're a resident of Kali Yuga and your inclination is towards polyamory, that's unusual. So try to understand that polyamory is not wholesome and natural in this era. It's natural, but unwholesomely natural in this era. So you're not weird. You shouldn't feel weird because of not feeling inclined towards it. But a follow-up question is, but why is it that Satya Yuga, which is supposed to be the ideal yuga, why is there polyamory? It's not just polygamy. Polygamy is many women. Polyandry is many men. Polyamory is much love, a lot of love. So there's a distinction. Polygamy extended into the beginning of Kali Yuga and extended well up to the end of Dwapara Yuga. But polyamory receded much sooner, receded in Treta Yuga. It's only really in Satya Yuga. But so the question is, that's supposed to be the ideal age. So then if we're saying that polyamory is existent in Satya Yuga, it seems like we're saying polyamory is the ideal thing. Why? Why are we saying that? But just a word of caution is what's ideal is dependent upon the person or the circumstances. So what's ideal behavior in Japan is not ideal behavior in France. Right? Similarly, what's ideal in Satya Yuga is ideal in Satya Yuga, and it's not ideal in Kali Yuga, and what's ideal in Kali Yuga is not ideal in Satya Yuga. So, however, why is it that in the most ideal time, the most ideal love seems to be polyamory? Well, it's because everybody was ideal. In Satya Yuga, there's very little imperfection in anyone. So a lot of the things that lead towards bias in love are absent in Satya Yuga. What would make you prefer one partner over another? This guy is much better than that other guy. But that's absent, almost entirely absent in Satya Yuga, because everyone is at the top. Everyone is equally great. So there's no real need for discriminating amongst the mates. The other thing is there's no criminals in Satya Yuga. So there's no social need for family units or even bigger units like communities and nations. There's no need for any of that stuff. When that's what in Satya Yuga also forget about polyamory, the government system is anarchy. Yeah, try to run anarchy now, it'll be a bloodbath. But it's Satya Yuga, the ideal form of the way people conducted themselves was anarchistic. There was no laws. How could there be no laws? Because everybody was moral. There's no necessity for laws. So since there's no necessity for laws, you don't have to protect children. The person down the block is not going to kidnap your kid. They're going to feed your kid. They're going to they don't see your child as being different from their own child. Everybody's taking care of everybody's children. You don't need families. So that is why in Satya Yuga, there is no point to marriage. Isn't Bhakti, so another follow-up question to this is, what about Bhakti and Prema? Bhakti or Prema or love, it was said that it has one-pointedness to it. So doesn't love by its nature have a one-pointedness? And therefore isn't it monoamory or monogamy? Why isn't it more ideal than polyamory? Good question. If prema is exclusive, you're correct. This is part of the definition of love. When the more intense love becomes, the more it generates bias or preferentiality. So you can understand that Satya Yuga is not a highly lusty yuga. It's not a highly passionate yuga. It's a very dispassionate yuga. That's the context in which polyamory works. That's the context in which anarchy works. It doesn't work in a European Mediterranean context. So Prema is exclusive, yes. It increases bias towards the being who's beloved. But exclusivity, this is the basic Vedic principle is that exclusivity is not exclusive of diversity. Does not preclude diversity, right? Advayam Jnanam, one tattva reality manifests in multiple ways to multiple perceivers of it. One thing has multitudes. Eko bahusyat. The one thing itself is many things. So the exclusivity of love doesn't have to mean that it's exclusive. It doesn't mean that it has to be divisive. Love is not divisive, right? You have the concept of love being exclusive, but you have a simultaneous concept of love being unifying. It's not divisive. So you have to think pretty hard about how can this thing be exclusive yet unifying, not divisive. So it has to do with the concept, it has to do with the concept of the identity of the beloved. Who do you think that you love? In Satya Yuga, people's concepts of identity was very elevated. They're interacting with each other on a very high level of self-concept. They're basically interacting with Paramatma and how they're interacting with each other. So they don't see like, oh, today I love this person and tomorrow I love that person. I love what's wrong with me? I love different people on different days. It's the same person that they love in everybody. So that's what Satya Yuga is. The concept of identity and self is more in Atma and Paramatma. Therefore, they love equally, diversely, because they actually love the same being exclusively in everyone. But again, it depends on what your concept of ideal is. if your concept of ideal is moving towards Paramatma and Brahman, then you're going to feel, then it's going to make sense to you that Satya Yuga's concept of love is the most ideal love. You will not be able to find a passionate love in Satya Yuga, because passion is Rajaguna and Satya Yuga is full of Sattva. Passion is highly biased. If your concept of ideal love is something very passionate, romantic, dedicated, sacrificing yourself, killing yourself for the other one, then that's not going to be found in Satya Yuga. That's going to be found more easily in Kali Yuga, or maybe Dwapara Yuga. The most ideal love is not actually, the most ideal love is not in Satya Yuga or any other yuga. It's nowhere in the universe. Love is something which is very difficult to manifest within this universe because of the ignorance of self. But if you really want to see a concept of ideal love, then look at Krishna Loka. There, what you'll find there is vividly astonishing, vital expression of diversity in exclusivity and unity in bias. It is the people's bias towards an exclusivity of focus upon Krishna, which unites them all. Everyone loves one being exclusively. They all love Krishna, and that's who they love. But by doing so, since they all love Krishna, they all cooperate intimately. And therefore, they're loving each other. They actually are loving each other as a result of their love for Krishna. So Satya Yuga is coming close to that. But Krishna Loka shows it in a more passionate way. Another question, can we love someone as a, quote, living murti of Hari? So in other words, can you say, I love this person, and since they're Paramatma, then my love for this person will be my service to Hari. Just like I would serve a murti of Hari. It's like I might have a little Krishna deity and serve breakfast or something. Then, well, doing the same thing for this being, this person, my husband, my wife, my boyfriend, my girlfriend, my mother, my father, is my service to Hari. Is that, is that kind of like accepted or condoned in Bhakti yoga? Of course it's accepted. Actually, it goes further, and it says if you love anybody without that concept, then you're loving in ignorance, and your love is really basically something else, not really love. So it's like, to love somebody not in that way is not really love. The real concept of love is everybody, since Hari is the real self, then love for Hari is the only most natural way to love, because love of the self is the first and primary thing. And since Hari is the self of all selves, then that's the purpose for loving everybody. Okay, you have it. Okay, be quiet. Okay. A follow-up question is, so although everyone is related to Hari, no one except Hari is Hari. So we should love everyone because of our love for Hari, and it will help us develop our love for Hari, but the loving of everyone doesn't replace your love for Hari. If it replaces your love for Hari, then it loses its whole purpose in the first place. Follow up to this is, so I heard of examples of women in India, the wives see their husbands as like a living murti of Hari. I read somewhere that Indian women offer their pujas to benefit their husbands because they relate to them as a form of Vishnu, quote unquote. My question is this an Indian thing? Indian women are the only ones that offer their pujas to benefit their husbands? I mean, don't Italian women pray to Jesus for their husbands and their kids? Is it really some weird Indian cultural thing, or is it just normal? Or is it Indian women? Is it just women? Like, don't men do their worship and pray for the benefit of their families, their wives, their children? Is it really such a weird thing? Something that's unrelated? Maybe the part of form of Vishnu, the husband as a form of Vishnu, sounds a little weird, but it's not. It's simple. God is basically the husband. It doesn't mean your husband is God, but it means that God is your husband. Why? What does a husband do? The husband gives you a house. The husband gives you food to cook. The husband gives you the ability to have a child. The husband gives you a place to be safe. The husband protects you. The husband gives you a ground to exist upon. That's what a husband classically does. Well, that's God. That's what God does. So actually, the real husband is God, and anybody else who helps in a similar way is acting like God, in a good way, not in a bad way. So since God maintains the universe, anyone that maintains others is a type of God or an aspect of God. So that's why in Indian culture, and I think probably in other cultures, people like parents, husbands, wives, fathers, mothers are seen as in a divine light. They're seen in a divine way. I don't think it's really all that strange. Now, winding up the Q&A, actually with still a whole bunch more questions. In reference to the fourth canto allegory of, so here's a new chapter. In reference to the fourth canto allegory of Pranjana, does Vidarbhi being, so you have to remember this one, does Vidarbhi being paired with Hari as two swans indicate that Hari is her real intellect, since all pairs in the story are soul intellect? My reply is, I think that's acceptable. I don't see why that would be unacceptable. At the end of the story, Hari reveals, that Vidarbhi is actually a swan and that he is her swan partner. So this could be extrapolated to illustrate that when the individual relates to Hari, Hari's own intrinsic Shaktis provide that individual with the intellect, mind, body, senses, identity capable of direct interaction with him. Right? In this story, there's the main character and then the spouse. So first it's Pranjana and Vidar and the queen. I don't know if she was named. First is Pranjana and the queen. The queen is the intellect, the interface to the world, and the king was the soul. Then in the next incarnation, it's the princess Vidarbhi as the soul and her husband Malyadvaj as the intellect. And then finally it's revealed that Vidarbhi and Pranjana, they're actually this other being, the swan, that lives with another swan called Hari together as a pair. So that would indicate that the same function that was fulfilled by the queen and the prince is fulfilled by Hari. So that would indicate that in order to exist with Hari, Hari provides you with the body and intellect and so forth. Wow. Okay, there's a couple more questions. How do we reconcile the intimate nature of devotion with the communal nature of many bhakti practices? So bhakti is love. Love is a very intimate thing, but most of the practices seem to involve doing things with other people. So how do you make sense of that? It's just like soccer. Soccer, if you're a soccer fan, then you have a personal feeling about soccer, right? But when do you really enjoy soccer? You really enjoy soccer when you go to the stadium or a bar with a bunch of other people that really enjoy soccer. It's not that bhakti practices are overly communal. And by bhakti, I mean any kind of emotional practice, like enjoying a soccer game. They're not overly communal. You can't go to an arena full of sewing fans and enjoy soccer. It will be depressing. Everybody will be not into it. Similarly, the bhakti practices that are communal with other bhaktas of a similar type as you, so other people that you're intimate with. The bhakti practices are communal with other people who are intimately similar to you and intimately favorable with you. Just like you can't go to a concert, a Metallica concert, with a bunch of people that don't like music. Another question. Are the bhavas of bhakti stages of growth in our relationship to Hari? So by this, the bhavas means the sthai bhavas. So the correct names of the sthai bhavas is Shuddha, Priti, Priyata, Vatsal, and Madhurya, or something. I may have gotten them wrong, actually. So are they stages of growth in relation to Hari? It's not maybe stages, maybe they're stages, but what they definitely are is the later bhavas are evolutes or more evolved forms of the previous bhavas. So like bhava 5 is an evolute of 4, which is an evolute of 3, which is an evolute of 2, which is an evolute of 1. The follow-up question is, can you explain how the bhavas are related as evolutes? The first bhava is called Shuddha. That means purity. So the first bhava for love is the purity. What's purity? It's a lack of personal wants or needs, which results from a lack of ignorance about the self. So that's the basis for love. And then the evolute from that, purity can evolve into wanting and needing things for a beloved. So the first stage is not needing or wanting anything for yourself. That can evolve further into, still, I don't want or need anything for myself, but I want or need things for people that I love. That's the second one, which is called priti, or it results in a feeling of dasya rasa, which means you like to do things for other people. That affection for others can evolve into the third state, which is if I have wants and needs for others, I need to know the wants and needs of the others. So I need to get close to those people. So the third bhava is the closeness between the lover and the beloved, the intimacy, which is typical of friends. So it's a friendly type of feeling. It's informal, direct contact. That's the third bhava. That kind of friendly intimacy can evolve further, two more stages. The fourth one is where it becomes protective. Your wants and your needs could be better. Your wants and your needs won't bring you the most happiness. Let me help you let me influence your wants and needs. That's what the fourth and the fifth stage are all about. I want to influence your wants and needs so that you enjoy even more. The fourth one is in a sense of like, let me protect you from mistakes in your wants and your needs. And that's like a parental feeling when it's by itself. When it's the conclusion, when it's the end of the evolutionary chain, it develops a paternal feeling, a protective feeling. I'm going to protect you from developing the wrong way, wanting the wrong things, and going the wrong way. If it develops still further, it's not just protecting you from the bad ones, but it's amplifying the good ones. So it has this flirtatious nature to it and a temptatious nature to it, a seductive nature to it. It becomes romantic love. So the excitation of the wants and needs in the beloved is the fifth bhava. So you can see now how their evolutes are related. The follow-up question is, the first bhava is shanta, right? Which means peacefulness. So shouldn't we try to be peaceful all the time and be calm in our relationship with Krishna? So the reply here is the bhava is not shuddha. The bhava is not shanta. The bhava is shuddha. The rasa is shanta. Rasa is the thing that results from the bhava. If you just have shuddha, if you just have purity and no selfish desires, then the experience or the rasa of that is shanta. You have absolute peace. But if this integrates into this, if this evolves to the second thing, it's going to produce us the second ras, which is you like to be active for other people. Dasya ras. The shuddha is the quality of what the shanta, the peacefulness, is the quality which is experienced when the evolute of the bhava goes only to the first stage. But still, the question is, shouldn't we then have some effect of that in the further evolutes? And the answer is yes, but you have to correctly understand what calm means and what the first bhava really is. The key trait of the first bhava is purity, and calmness is the result of that purity. Purity means lack of selfish desire, and calmness is what results from that. So in the further evolutes of the bhavas, what you'll still find is absolute calmness relating to self-desires. So you'll never find in prema of a madhurya bhakta, of a romantic bhakta, you'll never find any worry or anxiety about themselves, about their own needs, about their own wants, about their own pleasures or happinesses. They have no worries about that. They're completely calm in relation to that. But you'll find that they'll become anxious, especially in parental, starting from parental love, you'll especially see that they become very anxious about the wants and the needs of the person that they're in love with. It's not contradictory to have anxiety about the happiness of the beloved. Is not contradictory with having no anxiety about oneself. Another question: how can emotion for God be attained by repetition of mantras? My reply is it can't. Follow-up question is: emotion is liquid like water. It's rasa. So it's fluid and unstructured. So shouldn't a bhakta try to develop more sincerity and tenderness in their internal feelings instead of scheduling, organizing, maximizing, overanalyzing our love for God? My reply is yes. So since you asked these questions, which have such short answers, I'm not sure why you're asking these things, which are obvious principles of bhakti yoga, but maybe it's because you misunderstood bhakti sadhana by conflating it with other religious and spiritual practices that people might describe as bhakti. Or maybe you're observing practitioners of bhakti yoga who are not really practicing bhakti yoga effectively. Apparently you have a concept that bhakti yoga involves, external scheduling and organizing and maximizing of this and that and overanalysis of blah, blah, blah. So maybe you've mistaken this. Your perception of it is mistaken. Or maybe you've observed somebody whose practice is mistaken. Bhakti sadhana is a practice of softening the heart. That is a practice of softening the heart. We do not practice repetition of mantra or mechanical or intellectual disciplines. Now that statement might sound ludicrous. We do not practice repetition of mantra or mechanical or intellectual disciplines. So the follow-up question is, if you don't repeat mantras, then what is the Hare Krishna mantra? The Hare Krishna mantra is not a mantra, and it's not repeated. What? The Hare Krishna mantra is the name of our beloved, and we contemplate it or sing it. Repetition can be used to aid the contemplation and the song, but it's not the purpose or the focus of the practice. Follow-up is, what do you mean it is not a mantra? What do you mean Hare Krishna is not a mantra? My reply is, mantra refers to the hymns used in rituals and ceremonies. Hare Krishna Maha Mantra is not such a mantra, period. But mantra also refers to verbal, so that's the mantra in the context of karma. In the context of jnana, mantra means a verbal code used as a seed for meditation. The Hare Krishna Maha Mantra is a mantra in that sense. But by you saying a repetition of mantra, you're revealing that your concept of the mantra is in the first sense, something which is formal, ceremonial, ritualistic. And that is not what is going on in Bhakti sadhana. If you are seeing somebody doing that, they're practicing incorrectly. And if you thought that that's what it was, you misunderstood. If bhakti does not involve mechanical or intellectual discipline, then why do we practice certain activities and study certain concepts. As you noted, my reply, bhakti is very natural. That's what you were saying, right? It's unstructured. It's like water. It's very natural. It flows naturally. It doesn't need practice, really. So what's this thing that we're calling bhakti practice, bhakti sadhana? Most of bhakti sadhana, as explained by the people who teach it, like Sri Rupa Goswami, it's really a preliminary practice for getting rid of our disqualifications. Or more accurately, it's really a practice of getting rid of the things that make us not want it. So the activities and the studies that you're talking about here, like maybe, I don't know, having a practice of waking up at a certain time, or engaging in the study of ideas and shastras and philosophies, those are not practices of bhakti directly, but they are very effective practices for bhakti because they get rid of the misconceptions and misbehaviors that prevent us from actually naturally gelling with what bhakti is, actually wanting bhakti. So actually most of what bhakti sadhana is, because love is not something that is mechanically produced. You remember the definition of it was kriti sadhya bhavet sadhya bhava. Sasadhanabhida. If you emulate an emotion, you could potentially learn how to feel it. That's the definition of bhakti sadhana itself. So the actual parts where we're emulating emotion, that's where the actual bhakti is being practiced. And there's no need to have no structure to that. You say water is not structured, then try to make water without H2O in a certain configuration. Water is a structure. Its structure is fluid. So it's not that the bhakti practice should not be there. There should be no discipline. There should be no practice. There should be structure to it. And the parts where you're structurally, intentionally trying to emulate a feeling, that's where you're trying to practice bhakti. The rest of the stuff is also extremely important, and even more important to us practically is to remove the anartha, remove the problems, the aparadhas, the things that interfere with the liquidity of our own being. Very good. So now I have to go see my new place because they're doing the walls and things like that.